My parents told me in front of everyone that I'd never be as good as my sister. She got everything handed to her, cars, vacations, endless praise, while I worked 2 jobs just to buy my own clothes. But everything changed the day I finally walked away. In my family, there were 2 daughters, but only one they truly saw. My sister Olivia could skip curfew, blow through dad's credit card, or fail every class, and somehow she was still their pride and joy. Me? I could do everything right, work myself to exhaustion, and it wouldn't matter. To them, I was just the shadow that made her shine brighter. It didn't matter what I did. If I aced a test, they said, "Looks like watching Olivia study is finally paying off." If I saved my own money to buy something, they'd smile and say, "Maybe Olivia inspired you to be more responsible." But if I ever made one mistake, a late homework, a missed chore, I was the failure, the burden, the girl who would never measure up. Family gatherings were the worst. Relatives lined up to ask Olivia about her college plans, her sports, her future. When they turned to me, it was just a casual, "So, what are you doing these days?" And if I stayed quiet, I was antisocial. If I spoke, I was jealous. There was no winning. And Olivia loved it. She'd sit there smiling like she earned her pedestal, whispering digs just loud enough for me to hear. Maybe if you weren't so bitter, they'd like you more. Maybe if you tried harder, you wouldn't always be second place. And as much as I hated it, a part of me believed her. Because in that house, the rules were never the same for both of us. If Olivia forgot chores, I got grounded. If she borrowed money and didn't pay it back, I got the lecture on responsibility. If mom or dad had a bad day, somehow it was my fault, never hers. But that night when my parents said, in front of everyone, that I'd never be as good as Olivia, something shifted inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just sat there, staring at my plate, while one thought echoed louder than anything else. Maybe they're right, but maybe I don't care anymore. Because if the only way to matter in that family was to be more like Olivia, then maybe it was time to stop trying to matter to them at all. I didn't plan on leaving that night. I wasn't some rebellious kid storming out to make a point. I'd learned a long time ago that nothing I did ever changed how they saw me. But when I walked into the living room and saw my sister sprawled on the couch, laughing with her friends, while my parents gushed over how responsible she was, something inside me cracked. Just 24 hours earlier, she'd borrowed mom's car, stayed out all night, and somehow I was the one grounded because I must have known where she was. And now, she was the hero again, the mature one, the daughter they bragged about. My parents looked at her like she could do no wrong, and at me like I was some stranger freeloading off their air. Then came the final straw. Mom tossed me a pile of laundry, her laundry, and told me to be useful for once. Dad added, without looking up from his phone, "Maybe if you helped around here more, you wouldn't feel so left out all the time." My sister smirked and said, "Don't worry, she's used to cleaning up after me." They all laughed. Something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not even sad, just quiet. I realized in that moment they weren't ever going to change. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I tried, I was never going to be more than the punching bag, the afterthought, the other daughter. I walked upstairs, shut my door, and for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. I pulled out the envelope I'd been hiding, the one with the money I'd been saving for months from my shifts at the diner. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me out of there. A bus ticket, a security deposit on a tiny apartment, enough to start over. I packed a single bag. No goodbyes, no explanations. I didn't even leave a note because I knew they wouldn't care. Not really. They'd probably just roll their eyes and tell each other I'd come crawling back when reality hit. But as I zipped up that bag and looked around the room I'd spent my whole life in, I felt something I'd never felt in that house before. Freedom. Terrifying. Uncertain freedom, but freedom all the same. I wasn't leaving because I hated them. I was leaving because I finally understood something they never would. I wasn't worthless. Not anymore. The bus ride out of town didn't feel real. My hands shook as I clutched my one duffel bag, my savings envelope buried deep inside, like it held my entire life, because it kind of did. I stared out the window at the fading streetlights, half expecting to see my parents' car pulling up, demanding I come home. But no one came. No one even noticed I was gone. By the time I got to the city, the adrenaline had worn off, and the fear started to creep in. I didn't know a soul. I didn't have a plan, just a list of cheap apartments I'd circled online and enough money to cover a deposit and maybe a month of rent, if I skipped eating anything more expensive than instant noodles. The first place I found wasn't much. A one-room studio with a leaky sink, a flickering hallway light, and paper-thin walls. The landlord barely looked at me when I handed him cash, just shoved the key across the counter. "No refunds," he muttered. It wasn't home, but at least it was mine. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat cross-legged on the bare mattress, and let it all hit me. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone. No one telling me I was a disappointment, no one telling me I'd never be enough, but also no one telling me anything. If I failed now, there was no one to blame. no one to bail me out. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, my stomach growling, and forced myself to get moving. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, taking every terrible table and double shift they'd give me. I walked to work because bus fare felt like a luxury. Every spare dollar went into a jar marked future, my only reminder that I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. But even as I pushed myself harder than ever, the doubts crept in at night. Lying on that thin mattress, listening to the neighbors argue through the walls, I'd wonder, what if my parents were right? What if I really am nothing without them? Still, every morning, I got up. Every night, I reminded myself that being broke and exhausted in my own place was still better than feeling worthless in theirs. For the first time in my life, my future, good or bad, felt like it actually belonged to me, and I wasn't about to let that slip away, no matter how hard it got. By the third week, the exhaustion was starting to crush me. Every morning I woke before the sun, worked double shifts at the diner, and came home with my feet aching so badly I could barely stand. I was surviving, just barely, but that wasn't why I left. I hadn't run away to scrub tables and collapse on a mattress every night. One evening, after another grueling shift, I passed by a community center on my walk home. A faded flyer was taped to the window. Night classes, scholarships available, registration open. I stopped. I read it again. I hadn't thought about school since leaving. Not seriously. My parents always said college was for Olivia, not me. She's the smart one. You're more practical, they'd say. But I wasn't going to work the diner forever. I couldn't. The next day, I scraped together the courage to walk inside. The woman at the front desk looked surprised to see me. "You here to sign up?" she asked. I hesitated. "I don't have money for tuition." She slid a pamphlet toward me. "Scholarships? If you want it bad enough, we'll help you find a way." For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't fear or exhaustion. I felt hope. Real, buzzing, this could change everything hope. That night, I pulled out my jar of tips and crumpled bills. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the registration fee. I filled out the forms by candlelight because my apartment's power flickered out halfway through, and I wasn't about to stop. The program wasn't easy. It meant finishing my diner shifts, then dragging myself to class, running on little more than black coffee and sheer stubbornness. Some nights I thought about quitting. My body screaming, my mind fried. But every time I thought about my parents' voices, telling me I'd never be more than a shadow to Olivia, I pushed harder. One night after class, I stayed behind to talk to the instructor. I expected a quick dismissal, but instead, he looked over my work and said, "You're good, better than you think. If you stick with this, you can go far." No one had ever told me that before. Not a parent, not a teacher, no one. For the first time in my life, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the worthless one after all. The classes were brutal, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care how hard something was. Every hour I spent in that classroom felt like proof that I was building a life no one, not even my parents, could take from me. But there was one thing I didn't expect. Meeting someone who actually believed in me before I even believed in myself. It started on a Tuesday night, after everyone else had packed up. I was sitting in the hallway, hunched over my notes, trying to memorize a formula for the upcoming exam. My hands were shaking from exhaustion, 2 back-to-back shifts at the diner, and then class left me running on fumes. I didn't even notice someone standing there until a voice broke the silence. "You always stay late like this?" I looked up. It was Elena, a woman in her 20s who always sat 2 rows ahead of me. I'd barely spoken to her before. She dropped her bag beside me and sat down. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" she asked. I almost laughed, because if I don't, I'll end up stuck at the diner forever, and I can't go back home. Ever. She tilted her head. "What's wrong with home?" I hesitated, but for some reason I told her everything. About Olivia, my parents, how they made me feel invisible, worthless, like no matter what I did, I'd never measure up. I expected her to look at me with pity, or worse, judgment. Instead, she just nodded slowly and said, "Then prove them wrong. Don't just scrape by. Excel. Let them see the person they underestimated." That night, Elena became more than just a classmate. She became my first real ally. She offered to study with me, share her notes, even introduced me to someone she knew who could help me find better work than the diner once classes were done. "You're smart," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You just need someone to remind you." No one had ever said that to me before. Not once. Not even my own family. For the first time, I felt like maybe all those nights I cried in my childhood bedroom, wondering if I'd ever be more than Olivia's shadow, weren't going to define me anymore. Maybe I was finally running towards something. The weeks blurred together into a haze of exhaustion and stubborn grit. I'd wake before dawn, grind through endless hours at the diner, then drag myself to class until late at night. The only thing keeping me from collapsing was the reminder Elena had drilled into my head: prove them wrong. One night after class, our instructor announced a scholarship opportunity, a full ride for the next semester, given to the top student in the program. My heart sank immediately. I wasn't the top student. I was barely holding it together, running on coffee and 4 hours of sleep. But Elena nudged me in the ribs and whispered, "This is yours. Stop doubting." For the next 2 weeks, I pushed harder than I ever had in my life. Every break at the diner was spent cramming flashcards. Every walk to class, I recited notes aloud like prayers. I even sold my old phone, the only nice thing I'd ever bought for myself, just to pay for extra tutoring sessions. The day of the scholarship test, I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold my pencil. All I could hear were my parents' voices in my head. "You'll never be as good as Olivia. She's the smart one. You're just you." When I turned in my test, I didn't feel relief. I felt numb. Convinced I'd failed, I went straight back to the diner and scrubbed tables until my fingers ached, trying not to think about it. 3 days later, I got the call. I'd done it. I hadn't just passed. I'd scored the highest grade in the program. The scholarship was mine. For the first time in my life, something that big, that good, had my name on it. Not Olivia's. Not because of Olivia. Mine. When I told Elena, she hugged me so tightly I almost cried. "See? You're not worthless. You were just stuck in a house that convinced you were." That night, sitting in my tiny apartment with the scholarship letter in my hands, I let myself imagine a future, a real one, not as a shadow, not as a disappointment, but as someone who'd finally carved out a life no one could take credit for but me. It was just one win, but it felt like the first real proof that leaving home hadn't been a mistake. While I was piecing together my own life, Olivia's picture-perfect world was starting to unravel. Not that my parents noticed at first. To them, she was still the golden girl, the one they bragged about at dinner parties and plastered across holiday cards. But beneath the surface, things weren't so flawless. It started small. I heard through a mutual friend that Olivia had been skipping classes, the same college courses my parents practically worshipped her for attending. "She's just stressed," they'd say, brushing it off. "She deserves a break. She's been working so hard." Working hard. From what I remembered, Olivia's idea of work was smiling pretty and letting people hand her what she wanted. Then came the bigger cracks. Her boyfriend, the one my parents adored and called the perfect match, dumped her for someone else. Apparently, Olivia had been draining his money, throwing parties, and skipping out on her own bills. Instead of owning up to it, she spun the story to our parents, claiming he was jealous of her success. And of course, they believed every word. But her luck didn't hold forever. I found out through social media, not from Olivia, not from my parents, that she'd been put on academic probation. Her grades had tanked so badly she was 1 semester away from getting kicked out. My parents never mentioned it to me, probably because they were too busy defending her to anyone who would listen. "Olivia's just overwhelmed," they'd insist. "She's got so much on her plate." Meanwhile, I was thriving quietly. I didn't rub it in, didn't even reach out. I was too focused on keeping my own momentum going. My scholarship, my classes, the faint glimmer of a future I'd built with my own hands. But hearing about Olivia's life slowly crumbling felt strange. Not satisfying, not exactly, just strange. For years, I'd dreamed of a moment where she'd finally get what she deserved, where people would see the truth behind her golden girl act. But when it finally started happening, I didn't feel the rush of victory I thought I would. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Distance. For the first time, Olivia's chaos didn't affect me. Her downfall wasn't my problem anymore. Still, a tiny part of me wondered, when her world fully falls apart, and I knew it would my parents finally look at me differently? Or would they just find another way to make her mistakes mine? Either way, I wasn't going back. By the time Olivia's perfect image was starting to crumble, my world was finally starting to take shape. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something real. It started with a single email. Late one night, after a double shift at the diner and another 3-hour study session, I opened my laptop and saw the subject line, "Congratulations, internship offer." I blinked at it, certain it had to be a mistake. I'd applied weeks ago to a competitive internship tied to my program, never expecting to even hear back. And now, I had it. Paid, part-time, and a direct path into a career I'd once thought was impossible for someone like me. The next morning, when I walked into class, I almost didn't tell anyone, but Elena noticed the grin I couldn't hide. "You got it, didn't you?" she said, hugging me before I could even answer. "Told you, this is just the start." The internship changed everything. I still worked the diner to cover bills, but now, during the day, I was actually doing something I cared about. For the first time, my work didn't just feel like survival, it felt like progress. My supervisor, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, saw how hard I was willing to push myself. "People who claw their way up like you," she said one day, almost offhandedly, "they're the ones who make it." Every compliment felt surreal. I wasn't used to being seen, let alone praised. Back home, any success I had was either dismissed or handed over to Olivia as something she must have inspired. But here, no one even knew who Olivia was. My achievements belonged to me. That night, I came home to my little apartment, still tiny, still with flickering lights and paper-thin walls, and looked around. It was far from perfect, but it didn't feel temporary anymore. This wasn't just a place I ran to. It was the first stepping stone toward the life I actually wanted. For so long, I thought escaping my family would mean living with a permanent hole, like I'd always be incomplete without their approval. But now, with each day, each class, each hour at that internship, I felt like I was finally becoming someone new, someone who didn't need their validation. And deep down, I knew, if Olivia could see me now, thriving without a single ounce of their help, it would drive her insane. But for once, that didn't matter. This wasn't about her anymore. While my life was finally starting to rise, Olivia's world was falling apart faster than anyone could spin it into another "she's just stressed" excuse. The stories started trickling to me through friends and social media, not from my parents, of course. They were too busy pretending everything was fine, clinging to the image of their perfect daughter. First came the probation. Olivia's grades had plummeted so badly, the college sent her a formal warning. One more failed class and she'd be expelled. My parents brushed it off as unfair professors and told everyone she was taking fewer classes by choice. The truth? She wasn't going to class at all. Then came the eviction. The off-campus apartment my parents were paying for? Gone. Not because they couldn't afford it. They were still bankrolling her every whim. But because Olivia had been throwing parties so often that the neighbors petitioned the landlord to kick her out, my parents smoothed it over, found her another place, and told everyone she needed a change of scenery. But the worst hit came when her boyfriend, the one they called the man who will make our daughter's life perfect, broke up with her publicly. And not just a breakup. He posted screenshots of texts, showing Olivia bragging about draining his accounts, mocking him behind his back, and calling him the backup plan in case her real options didn't work out. Overnight, her social circle vanished. The girl everyone once wanted to be seen with was suddenly toxic. For the first time, my parents couldn't spin the story anymore. People were talking, family friends whispered, relatives who used to fawn over Olivia were suddenly asking, what happened to her? Did my parents finally admit they'd put all their faith in the wrong daughter? Of course not. Instead, they doubled down, calling anyone who criticized Olivia jealous, and, predictably, finding a way to bring me into it. One of our cousins told me they'd overheard my mom saying, if she weren't so bitter, maybe her sister wouldn't be under so much stress. She's probably part of the reason Olivia's struggling. Even when Olivia's empire was crumbling, I was still the convenient scapegoat. But this time I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt done. Their chaos, their drama, their endless excuses, none of it had power over me anymore. And I had a feeling things were about to get a whole lot messier. Because when Olivia finally hit rock bottom, I knew exactly who my parents would come crawling to. The call came late on a Sunday night. I almost didn't answer. The number flashing on my screen was my parents, and for months I'd been letting those calls go to voicemail. Every time I did pick up, it was the same. Subtle digs about how hard it must be living on my own, passive-aggressive comments about how Olivia missed her sister, or awkward small talk that ended with nothing of substance. But this time, the voicemail they left sounded different. My mom's voice was strained, tight, like she was trying to sound calm and failing. We need to talk. Call us back, please. It's important. Against my better judgment, I called back. My dad answered almost immediately. No pleasantries, no how are you, just, your sister's in trouble and we need your help. Apparently, Olivia had officially been kicked out of school. Her grades didn't recover, and the probation turned into a full expulsion. To make things worse, she'd racked up debt, credit cards, unpaid bills, even a personal loan she'd lied to my parents about. They'd been covering for her for months, quietly paying off what they could, but now it was too much. They were tapped out. Look, my dad said, trying to keep his voice steady. We know you've gotten yourself together. You have a job, right? Savings? Maybe you could lend us something to help Olivia get back on her feet. She's your sister. Family helps each other. I almost laughed. Family helps each other? The same family that told me I was worthless? The same parents who couldn't even be bothered to ask how I was surviving when I left because they were too busy propping up their golden child? Part of me wanted to scream, to ask why they thought I owed Olivia anything after the years I spent cleaning up her messes, taking her punishments, living in her shadow. Another part of me felt that old familiar ache, the little girl inside me who still craved their approval, who still wanted to hear, "We're proud of you. We're sorry." But they didn't call to apologize. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because, for the first time, Olivia couldn't bail herself out, and they needed the daughter they used to treat like nothing. I didn't give them an answer that night. I just said, "I'll think about it," and hung up. For the first time in my life, they needed me more than I needed them. Walking up the driveway felt surreal. The same house I left months ago, the house where I was told I'd never be enough, now felt smaller, older, almost fragile. The perfect polished image my parents always projected was gone. The flower beds were overgrown, the paint on the shutters chipped. It wasn't the same shrine to Olivia it used to be. My dad opened the door before I even knocked. For the first time, he didn't look like the unshakable man I grew up with. He looked tired, defeated. Behind him, I saw my mom pacing, her phone in hand, barking at someone about overdue payments. And then there was Olivia. She was sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over, wearing sweatpants and an old hoodie. No makeup, no confident smirk, just a hollow stare at a pile of bills spread out in front of her. When she glanced up and saw me, her eyes flickered with something I'd never seen before. Not pride, not annoyance, shame. No one said anything at first. My mom broke the silence. "We're glad you came." Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, like she was afraid I might turn and leave right then. I sat down at the table looking at the three of them, the people who used to treat me like I was invisible, and waited. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Olivia needs time to get back on her feet. We just need a loan, temporary. You're doing well now, right? You can help." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it felt. Here I was, the daughter they said would never measure up, the one they ignored, the one they practically pushed out the door, and now they were looking at me like I was the only person who could save them. For a moment, I just looked at Olivia, the sister who used to whisper, "Maybe if you weren't so bitter, they'd like you." The sister who coasted while I worked myself raw, who got praise for breathing while I got punished for existing. Now she couldn't even look me in the eye. I took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to write a check," I said finally. "I came to see if any of you even realize what you did to me. And if you don't, maybe it's time I told you." My mom froze. My dad shifted uncomfortably. Olivia's eyes widened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one sitting in silence while they spoke. Now it was their turn to listen. The silence in that kitchen was heavier than anything I'd felt when I lived there. My parents, the same ones who told me I'd never measure up, suddenly couldn't look me in the eye. Olivia stared down at the table like the bills in front of her might save her from hearing what was coming. For years, I swallowed everything. The comparisons, the lectures, the way I was blamed for things Olivia did, punished for mistakes I didn't make, and told over and over that I should be more like her. I left this house because I thought if I stayed, I'd disappear completely. And now here they were, asking me to fix the mess they created. "You want me to help?" I started, my voice steady but shaking underneath. "But you don't even see what you did to me, do you?" My mom shifted uncomfortably. We know things were hard, but..." "Hard?" I cut her off. "You told me to my face that I'd never be as good as her. You blamed me for everything she did wrong. You treated me like a problem you were stuck with while she got to do whatever she wanted." I looked at Olivia. "Do you even realize how easy you had it? How much I covered for you just so I wouldn't get yelled at?" Olivia opened her mouth, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a clever comeback or a smug smile. She just stared at her hands. My dad spoke next, his voice low. "We didn't mean to make you feel that way. We just thought you were stronger." "Stronger?" I let out a bitter laugh. "No, you thought I was disposable. You thought you could tear me down, push me out, and I'd either crawl back or disappear. But I didn't. I left. And I made something for myself, without you, without your help, and definitely without your approval." I stood up. "I didn't come back to gloat. I came back because I needed to say this once to all of you. I'm not worthless. I never was. You just convinced me I was so Olivia could stay on her pedestal. But I'm done carrying this." No one said a word, not even Olivia. The silence was different now. Not heavy, but stunned, like they finally understood something they never wanted to face. I walked toward the door, pausing for one last glance back. "Figure things out yourselves." "I already have." And with that, I left the house, lighter than I'd ever felt walking out its door. The air felt different as I stepped out of that house. Lighter, sharper, like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally exhaled. Behind me, the walls that once made me feel so small were silent. No one ran after me, no apologies, no desperate pleas, just silence. I didn't need them to chase me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving to prove a point or to make them see my worth. I was leaving because I finally understood it myself. The walk back to the bus station felt surreal. I passed by the same streets I used to bike as a kid, the same corner store where Olivia and I used to beg for candy, the same cracked sidewalks where I used to wonder why I was never good enough. Except now, none of it felt heavy. It felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's story. When I reached my apartment that night, I didn't collapse in exhaustion like I used to. I didn't cry or shake or wonder if I made the right decision. Instead, I lit the one candle I had sitting on my counter, sat at the tiny table, and opened my notebook, the one I kept filled with ideas, goals, reminders of why I left in the first place. I wrote down 3 words at the top of the page. I'm not worthless. It wasn't a declaration for them. It wasn't something I needed my parents to hear, or Olivia to see. It was for me. A line in ink to remind myself of what I'd fought for, what I'd built, and what I'd never let anyone take away again. The phone buzzed once that night. My parents, again. This time I didn't even look at the message. I silenced the phone, closed the notebook, and for the first time in years, I let myself smile. A real, unforced smile. I wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. I wasn't second best. I wasn't anyone's shadow. I was free, and the life I was building, it was finally mine. And as for the people who once told me I'd never be as good as Olivia, they can watch from a distance, because I'm just getting started.